I said, fuck! Dick Donner went, what? I go, I'm sorry, holy shit, man. I gotta fuck it up. Like, look at that thing. And they go, no. You had to do it over a couple of times. That's a true story. We had to act that one because Josh fucked it up.
I'm surprised you booked another gig.
You what?
Surprised you booked another gig.
No, I know. And he saw Crazy Rich Asians, I think it was, and then he was like, maybe I can go back and do that. So he came back and won an Academy Award, just like that. He was awesome. He was amazing.
So, you recently shot the third Knives Out movie. I do not want you to say anything that will get you in trouble, but what can you tease about the story and the script? Like, what was it that said, oh, I want to be a part of this? Besides the first two being so good.
I loved both of them. I loved the acting in both of them. I preferred the first one, and the third one felt more like the first one, and that was kind of spoken by Ryan. And I talked to Ryan, and Ryan he doesn't come off as this, but he has this incredible control over his set. You know, there is a major presence that reminds me of Denis, that reminds me of the Coens, that reminds me of those types of directors. And he's a great writer. I read it and I was just like, God, this is so well written. You just don't read things like this anymore. And so it turned out that it was a cast, a lot of people who I had worked with, a lot of people who I loved and hadn't met yet, like Andrew Scott and Josh O'Connor and people like that. And then doing it turned out, I mean, it's one of my favorite jobs that I've ever had. I can't say what I played. It scared me, which I wanted to be scared. I kind of put it out there and I said, look, I've had a really good time. I loved playing Thanos. I loved being with the Russos. I loved their references. You know, they would come up to me on set and they'd be like, you remember Scarface? And I'd be like, I thought this was like a Marvel movie. You know? So they knew how to reference and get me going and all that. But I loved that whole time. But I just said to my agent, I said, I need to be scared. We need to find something that... And then that was offered. And it's good. There was one, I'll tell you a quick story. This is a very Hiddleston story. You know, who can't wait to do Shakespeare? But there was I had a long speech. And he said, I just need you to gesture in this next one. So he said, ready? Okay, action. And I kind of went. And he was like, that looks really dumb. Don't do that. And I go, well, I don't know what to do. And he said, just kind of like do half the scene. I was like, it doesn't make sense to do half the scene. So I started, and I had relearned this recently. And there were all these people playing close down there, all these amazing actors. And I started spouting off, and I won't do the whole thing, but I was like, oh, pardon me, thy bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers. Thou art the ruins of the noblest man that ever lived in the tide of times. Woe to the hand that shed this costly blood. Over thy wounds now do I prophesy, which like dumb mouths do ope their ruby lips to beg the voice and utterance of my tongue. A curse shall light upon the limbs of men. Domestic fury and fierce civil strife shall cumber all the parts of Italy. Blood and destruction shall be so in use, and dreadful objects so familiar that mothers shall but smile when they behold their infants quartered with the hands of war. Anyway, I went all like, okay, so you know Thanos, right? And I'm like, yeah. Like, he's like the most powerful. And he's like, okay, not the most powerful, but like they have those conversations. And then I think it was after I said yes that started. So I didn't for a second think that it was going to become what it became. And we were doing like tests during Everest, where we were doing different types of things on my face to be able to, we weren't doing dots, we were doing painting, and so they weren't technically there, but it just kind of like it was a perfect storm where they technically arrived at what they needed to arrive at in order for Thanos to. And then I remember coming in, I won't bore you with this, but I remember coming in and doing it for the first time in front of like 50 computers before we started those two movies. And I had kind of had this like Richard Burton thing in my head, not actually Richard Burton, but it was much more formalized, like Thanos. and the Russos were like, yeah, no. And they were like, just be, so we started to talk about what that was, and they were like, just like sit like this. And then that changed everything. The fact that it wasn't this presentation of this, you know, and then kind of scratching the face or you know, just normalizing the whole thing. And then we would go and watch it. And they'd go, yeah. And then I'd start talking about like Brando and Apocalypse Now. And they go, yeah, like do that. And then we'd start improvising. Me and Joe would start improvising back and forth. And that's kind of how it came to be. Like Thanos was like a, yeah, anyway.
I was going to say, one of the reasons I think Endgame is, for me, I remember being in the theater the first time I watched it, didn't know what was going to happen, and in the first act, he gets killed. And I was like, what the is going on? Because you figured that's a third act moment. So what was it like for you reading that script for the first time and seeing how it was very unconventional?
I never read the script.
Well, there you go.
And I was given scenes to memorize, which I diligently studied, that were fake. Like for real. And then I would come to work and they'd go, hey, there's been some changes. And I'd go, you motherfuckers, man. Like, because I put a lot of onus on prepping. You know, I like to be prepped and I put a lot of work into it. And then literally I would show up on the day and they'd be like, you know, if you need help with your lines, just call out for one. And I'd be like, dude, this is a whole speech. But we pulled it off.
That, you know, you could be re-emerging in some other, you know, a different version of the same character.
I would do, and I'm not kidding, I would do, there's a thing with like playing Thanos. It's like, oh, would you play, or they're going to bring Thanos back and all that. And it's like Sicario, it has to be right. You know, it's like Ryan Reynolds and I talking about Taylor Swift, and we should be talking about Deadpool 4. But we go back and forth, and it's like, it's like what in his mind fits, what in my mind fits, and all that. Thanos has to fit if you're going to bring him back. I would do anything that the Russos wanted me to do.
I heard that it was, and again, I don't know if this is true, and I want to make sure I'm not 100% on this, but the rumor is that Downey was the one who said, if you want me back, you're bringing back the Russos.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. When I heard that, I'm like, oh yeah, that, you know, they know what they're doing. They can make movies on this scale. They were huge successes. So you're not going to hint at all. Has anyone called, or do you want to flat out deny? You know what I mean? Sure, I get it.
Out there, he kept fucking it up until he figured his own shit out, and then he just like skyrocketed. But he always skyrocketed. He was always that guy. When you look at Downey in Less Than Zero, you're just like, wow. I mean, he continues to be one of the bravest actors ever. You know, Downey's on Broadway right now. It's like, what? You don't have to do that. Don't you have a lot of money? You know, and then
He's probably trying to do things like you, like that make him nervous.
no, but that's what it is. And honestly, you know, I've had long talks with him about that, and it's like,